The Memphis Grizzlies, Grant, are we sleeping on the Memphis Grizzlies? I know they haven't done anything really aside from draft Zach Edey, trade Zaire Williams to the Nets, but like they're gonna have John Morant back. They have Desmond Bain. They have Jaren Jackson Jr. We haven't seen a ton of those three playing with Marcus Smart together. We have to see how Vince Williams and Gigi Jackson fit into the larger context of the team, the healthier context of the team. We have to see what happens with Luke Kennard. How much does Zach Edey play? How good is he right away? What does Brandon Clark look like coming back from his injury, even though he started to play last season? This was a team that was just in the 50-win conversation the year before when they were healthy. And they've almost become like what the Bucks were in the East before they started really killing it on the minimum signing market, where people weren't really talking about how good they were or their ceiling anymore. Are we sleeping on the Memphis Grizzlies, Grant?
We certainly are. And I think it's just, I don't know. I keep framing this in my mind as like, what other than like, if you just say like, well, they're going to get hit by a ridiculous like string of unlucky injuries, John Morant's going to get suspended, like all this other stuff. Like if you just say they're going to have a normal health year for, all things considered, like even if you price in like Marcus Smart's probably going to miss time, Morant might miss a few games. Like there's definitely like normal injury risk priced in, but if you just assume they're like, the 15th unluckiest team in the league for injuries, as opposed to the 29th or 30th, like, why isn't this team going to win 53 games or whatever? Like, they have enough guys that are still the arrows up. Like the John Morant arrow, talent wise, like in terms of where he's at in his career, maybe he's topped out because of the athleticism stuff. Guys like him are going to have early peaks, I think, but he's at his peak, or maybe could still get better if he could shoot it. Bain, peak or still going up. Jaren Jackson Jr., wildly inconsistent as a shooter, like could stabilize there, still young enough to get better. Vince Williams, Santi Aldama, guys like Gigi Jackson, like a lot of arrows up. And this is coming from a team that a little bit different, but was a 50+ win team. I don't understand why they're not. You can have your top four in the West. I get it. Why they to me feel like they're more likely to jump into that group or like finish fifth than be down in the mess for, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's so much talent, and so much of it is at like the right point in their career trajectory.
And when you go back to 22, 23, when they were semi-healthy, and Bain, Jackson, and Morant played 969 possessions together, the team had a net rating of 11.7. Now, Steven Adams, gone. Dylan Brooks, gone. You rip those two away from the floor, the net rating actually goes up to like 31.7. The sample size is just so small. Yeah. But like the talent, the base of their talent is there. Now, if I'm a fan, am I a little bit disappointed that there weren't more strides made to try and make upgrades on the perimeter? Where, look, objectively, having to give up stuff to get rid of Zaire Williams to increase your wiggle room beneath the tax that will then allow you to keep a player that you already like had under contract or decline his team option in Luke Kennard. That's what we're assuming that the play was. That's unspectacular. That's not a reason to be super optimistic. The reason to just be super optimistic is the reason they haven't made any substantial moves or chased a substantial move aside from having Edey on the team is they don't know what they have in what does Gigi Jackson and Vince Williams and Marcus Smart look like with their top three guys. And if anything, the factor in all this that makes me uneasy, I understand he was dealing with injuries. I understand the roster was all over the place. Marcus Smart was so bad last year, then we were already not super high on that trade. I recognize if everyone's healthy, that could be their top 5, 6. That could be a pretty damn good top 5, 6. Maybe even you stretch it to 7. Maybe Edey's good right out of the gate. I tend to like Santi Aldama a lot more than the consensus. There's a path. It's not even a path. There's a case if they're healthy enough that this team is going to be a top 4 team, top 5 team in the Western Conference. They're just not being talked about it. I think it kind of blows my mind. I'm trying to make the case for why wouldn't you consider them in that circle? And it's aside from injuries. And it's just, for me, it comes down to, well, maybe the wing depth isn't where it needs to be, or you're just Marcus Smart is that bad again, in which case that's a pretty big hurdle to overcome.
Yeah. I think another one I'd point to is, the farther away we get from him at his best for this team, the clearer it becomes how much Steven Adams mattered. And the theory would be that Edey can do a lot of the bone crushing screen stuff and the offensive rebounding potentially, because those were always, the offensive rebounding and getting them out and running, because the half court offense was never great for even those really good Grizzlies teams. So getting extra possessions on the offensive glass was huge. Winning the turnover battle was huge. Like all that stuff. So the theory of why they might be worse is they just kind of lose all those marginal advantages that they had during the time Adams was there, and Brooks too. Shouldn't give him like a short shrift here. But even if you lose that stuff, it's still, so okay. They're a 48 win team. Like that's the floor, it's hard for me to imagine it going that badly with so much talent.
And you know what's interesting about the other thing is we could talk about what they don't have. It was kind of like a season of self-discovery for Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. Bane specifically, he was on that trek of shouldering more of the creation burden. Morant goes out, injury, suspension. He takes on even more of it. His efficiency is still largely intact. That's a fucking massive development for him. You go to Jaren Jackson Jr., yes, his efficiency declined. His isolation frequency also basically tripled.
Right. Totally different player. Like had to do completely different stuff last year.
And so now they know more. If they can figure out how to fit that version of themselves into a better version of the Grizzlies, where it's just, well, Ja Morant is here, that changes so much for them on offense, which I think you look at this team and I don't really know where they're going to land at either end of the floor, but I feel more confident in them having what could be a top tier offense during their best minutes. That's not reliant on offensive rebounding or drawing fouls necessarily than I have in quite some time. And I think a big part of that is just the level of experimentation and just development by fire that Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson went through last year without Ja Morant.
Yeah, I agree. All right. That takes, I almost did it. I almost bad alphabeted. I almost skipped right
past. Did I list it wrong or was it your fault?
No, it was my fault. I just was going to jump right to the Pelicans, but we're not there yet. The Minnesota Timberwolves.
I have 0 questions for them aside from the one that's listed, by the way.
I think it's a good question because it's kind of important. How big of a role will Rob Dillingham play out of the gate? And then maybe we can even expand it to like down this. Is he going to be like a rotation guy for sure by season's end? Because that would inform like, do they need to make a trade?
So I will say it does seem like, because you don't make that trade unless the front office and coaching staff are in lockstep with how important he's going to be. And there's no, like in Denver where Michael Malone had some of these alternatives, you don't have I guess we play Nickeil Alexander-Walker as a backup point guy, or does Chris Finch use Joe Ingles in that role? Like they don't have, that club is not in his bag. And so you almost have to play Dillingham at least through the regular season. I would expect if I set the over under for him on, I'm going to say 16 minutes a game. Are you taking the over or the under on that?
I'm taking the over, and it for their sake, it better be the over. Like right? Because otherwise, like you just look at what they did this, like I don't know if you're half joking, but like Ingles really might be on the ball like a fair amount. Just because he's got the reps in the pick and roll with Rudy Gobert, like that. Maybe that's a workaround where you don't have a conventional point guard, but you're achieving what you want, which is like some rim gravity, and then you can spray the ball around. But Kyle Anderson's also gone, and Monte Morris obviously is gone. So it's fair to say they are at a playmaking deficit relative to what they had last year. Unless Dillingham is someone, forget 16, like maybe he's someone that gives you 20, 23, 24 minutes. And like they have to be good minutes. Obviously he's not going to get that many if he's not playing well, but yeah, he's wildly important. And that's, it's a bold play by the Wolves. Like it really was, forget the assets they gave up, but just to say, we think this guy is a rotation guard right now. And we're going to just throw him out there because there just aren't alternatives. Like who else is going to dribble the ball and set up the offense? Maybe more Ant, I guess. But what about, I keep like thinking of things. How much are we going to get from Conley? Like we love Mike Conley, but like we are in the twilight years for this guy. Like you cannot overburden him. So maybe Dillingham's projected minutes need to be even higher than we're talking about, just for like preservative reasons. Right.
And they could just deal with injuries where if Mike Conley gets injured, like Dillingham, are you starting? Is that the answer at that point? So I think I would take the over too. And I don't know how to actually feel about the move. I appreciate the creativity and the not steering out of the second apron and just doubling down on the core you have, because the reason we just don't have other questions for the Timberwolves is they're that good. And we all know what kind of their defining weaknesses at this point is. It's shooting, the secondary playmaking, and they have someone now who theoretically addresses both. It's just that it comes in the form of a rookie, which you don't typically see teams operating at this level where the Timberwolves are a top, 2-3 team in the Western Conference leading into next year, you don't see him having to lean on anybody that new, that unproven generally.
I think the optimist take would be that Dillingham is he's an imperfect player in a perfect spot, because like what we've talked about even since draft night, like he can't really guard. He's small. The Wolves have what it takes to compensate for all that stuff. So he can just be good at the things he's good at. Like he really is. I guess that's a way of saying like, I get it. I get the gamble, because this is got a guy that like on another team, I don't think you should feel good about him being a winning player. As most rookies, you shouldn't feel good about them being winning players, but like him specifically because of his weaknesses. But Minnesota really is like just perfectly equipped to just hide those and let him do what they desperately need him to do, which is run the offense.
The other two things I've thought about, it's a plus and a negative to me. On the plus side, I don't think that people have talked about the off-ball gravity that he should have. I think that I've seen a lot of people compare him to Kobe White. If he has that type of an off-ball impact as a shooter, that opens up the offense for Minnesota's main players when you're playing with them. Now, potential downside for me is a lot of people think that his shot creation and the looks he's going to hit, the space he generates, that will translate. I didn't see enough of him. I'm not going to say whether I think it will or not. I don't know if Minnesota has the requisite spacing around him to where you're going to be able to get, like, he might just have a tougher time generating his own shots or working inside the arc. And that I'll be curious to see how that's handled. Does it help that he might be spending a lot of time with the second unit? Does it hurt? Because what is like the Timberwolves shooting on the second unit is not noticeably better than it is in the starting lineup. You could just say, okay, Rudy Gobert won't be on the floor. We'll have Naz Reid and Karl-Anthony Towns or just one of those. So you can game it that way. That's a concern I have, where it's never mind whether what he does best can translate. Let's look, it probably can translate, but is he in the offensive environment to where it's going to be able to translate close to that level right from the jump?
I think that's another case for the Wolves being the right team, is that they can and should just, if Dillingham's playing, for the most part, Gobert should not be in the game, because you just want maximum space for this guy. And you happen to have two other guys who can play center that provide a ton of space. So like, that's just another argument for how good this could go. I'm still going to default to like the most basic stuff and say he's a rookie. It's really hard for rookies to matter, especially on very good teams. So like it's an uphill battle, but I do think the pieces are sort of in place for this to work. I'm not going to believe it till I see it happen, but I don't know. I think there's room for confidence, at least, or optimism.
I like the creativity of the gamble. I love that.